Hi, this is Robert Colquhoun, Director of International Campaigns.
Por la vida en Colombia está lleno de frutos.
Geschlossen und manche Eltern sagen, ja, es ist nicht mehr selbst.
People start saying that, if your thoughts fall foul of the popular opinion, that they're somehow criminal.
Mi hija ha decidido no abortar.
Our freedom in a democracy, in our open society, begins with the freedom of speech.
Ante todo, los pilares de 40 días, ¿no? La oración, el ayuno, la yoga.
So sometimes it's just a little thing that we have to do. So
también dignidad, que son creados también por
But
Dios.
beyond what we say, anything we do at 40 Days for Life, anything we say to defend the unborn, we do with love.
Los bebés no tienen que ser abortados de una madre.
40 Days for Life International Podcast.
El podcast de 40 días por la vida internacional.
Hello and welcome to the 40 Days for Life International Podcast. My name is Robert Colquhoun. I'm the Director of International Campaigns. And I am with Kathy Clubb, who is our leader in Melbourne, Australia. She's done phenomenal work there, and she's also challenged the buffer zone laws that have been introduced pretty much to the whole of Australia now. So fascinating to hear somebody who's had the courage to stand up to the tyranny of the state and to all the court and trials that entails. We've had similar issues with buffer zones in the United Kingdom here. And I travelled to Melbourne in 2014, being outside the fertility control clinic, I believe it is. They'd done 300,000 abortions at that point. They'd had issues with a bodyguard who'd been killed in the past. But there's some great Australians out there who are for life and care passionate about the pro-life movement. Australia is about one of the most liberal places that you can get, along with other Western European countries. So, Kathy, how are you today, and how are things in Melbourne, Australia?
very chilly, Robert. Thanks for having me on. I'm doing well, thank you.
Excellent. And tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a home educating mother of 13 children. That's extraordinary. And tell us a little bit about you personally.
Well, at this stage, I only have 3 children left at home, so I'm much more like the average housewife these days. And my children are teenagers, so the days of phonics and changing nappies and so on are all over for me. In the past, it was very busy, as you could imagine, having a baby every couple of years and fitting the homeschooling around it. But I really do miss those days. They were quite wonderful.
Wow, we're almost about to come out of nappies with our youngest being 2 years old, on the verge of potty training. So that's 10 years of nappies. But what is the age range? So the age range of your children, and that's just quite something amazing. So to have 13 children, yeah.
The eldest is 35 and the youngest has just turned 14. And there's one set of twins in there. But they're almost 18 months, 2 years apart down through the years, almost. So it's quite a regular thing to have babies coming along, and it's wonderful. The children see it's natural for them to be surrounded by babies and to know how to take care of children. And the boys helped as well, and so the boys are quite confident around babies, which is great when they become dads. So yeah, a lot of benefits to having a big family, Robert, which I'm sure you know.
Absolutely. And you must be an absolute maverick homeschooling mum. So like the experience and the expertise, that's spanning 3 decades. So we're just starting out with our children of 10 and under, but you're on another level. So nearly 35 years experience. Yeah.
Yeah. You just do your best, and you just trust in Our Lady to make up for your deficiencies. That's how I got through it anyway.
And how did you get involved in the pro-life movement? When did you first start getting involved? When did you first start getting involved in 40 Days for Life?
Pro-life was about 12 years ago, and it was actually very sudden. I was actually going through a really rough time personally, and God literally pulled me out and said, stop feeling sorry for yourself, or, made me feel that this is what he was trying to tell me anyway. Don't feel sorry for myself, think about all these babies. And I just started calling different groups that were in my area and even around Australia, and started getting involved with just doing whatever I could do. Started doing all the research and learning about how other people were doing it and what kind of activities people were involved in. And I always thought it would be good for me to do writing and researching, because I can do that from home and still, won't monopolize my time outside the home so much. Things changed a bit when the buffer zones came in. And it was actually then that I started to pray outside an abortion mill in Tasmania, where I was living then, after the zones came in. An wonderful elderly gentleman had been doing it regularly, very quietly. And so I just joined him, and we'd pray once a week. And it was very low key. Subsequently, there was an arrest there, but it wasn't us. It was someone who came down from another state because he wanted to challenge the buffer zone law. That's Graham Preston. He's a really faithful man who's been doing full-time street work for decades. That's all he does. He's out there every day, rain, hail, or shine. He's really amazing. So we were there that day when he was arrested, and it was in the back of my mind that it would be good to challenge the law, but I ended up moving to another state, to Victoria, where I live now, and then got involved with the helpers of God's precious infants, who've been working on the Melbourne streets for about 20 years. And before 40 Days for Life came along, they were the biggest group. They were really faithful, and they pray outside the fertility control clinic. Even now, there are still a couple who pray regularly there. 40 Days for Life, I don't know the year they started. You probably know that. Was that 2014? Was that the first campaign?
That wasn't the first campaign. They'd been going for several years at that point. So like 2012, 2011. Yeah. So they've been around for quite a few years. Yeah.
Yeah. And so friends of mine, Fons and Trudy, did 10 campaigns over 5 years, which was really amazing, really an amazing effort. They drew largely on the helpers, whereas thankfully, since I've done 2, I'm about to do a 3rd, and we've been able to draw on people who haven't really done pro-life work before. So I think that's a really great achievement, actually, to be going outside the regular people, and that might be all they do in the year, but still, it's great. It's really great, and we found some really committed people who are just wanting to find some way that they can help.
Yeah, and in Britain, we like to make fun of Australians. We sent all the religious extremists to America, but we sent all the convicts to Australia, and so that's they're so good at running from the cops. That's why they beat us at cricket and rugby union and rugby league the whole time. So I've got some bush rangers and convicts in my family tree, so I'm just carrying that on, I guess. And so the culture in Australia, it's Barbie on the beach, and a bit of a macho culture, outdoors culture, very much so, less academic. Give us a brief overview of just the culture in Australia at the moment, and how the church sort of plays in its position in society.
Oh yes, it's a few years ago I would have been able to give you a really clear picture of what Australia was like, but we're experiencing a huge wave of immigration similar to what Britain's going through at the moment, and other parts of Europe as well. So the landscape has changed a lot. Culturally, it's changed a lot. It's very, it's basically a whirlpool at the moment. So the Australian culture is still there, the barbecues, the laid back attitude and sport and that kind of thing. But it is changing, and it's even quite hard to pin down what it is to be Australian these days. It's a bit disorienting. Yeah, but you were talking about the academic levels and the intellectual levels. There is a class of really good thinkers here, and we do have a lot of inventions come out of Australia. Medical breakthroughs and tech. We're good at tech, and we do seem to be pretty good problem solvers as well. So it's not all about sitting back and having a beer and watching football.
Yeah. So tell us what it's like doing 40 Days for Life in Melbourne. You know, you're praying on the streets, you're bringing the gospel of life to the public. What's the kind of typical response in engaging with the public in Australia on abortion? Is it Marmite, love, hate? You get abuse? What's the kind of response do you get on the street?
It's actually quite difficult to engage people at all.
Okay.
It's hard to begin a conversation. Most people don't want to stop and even have a chat. And that is something that has come with this change in the culture.
Okay.
But also it's in a city. So that's always going to be people that are rushing off to work and so on, especially where we're positioned near a train station, very busy train and tram intersection. The people that we do engage with, we really get the whole spectrum, from polite conversations and really respectful interchanges, even with people that don't agree with us, and all the way up to violence and assault. Thankfully, that's quite rare, but you know that has happened here. So most of the time, we just pray. We just get about the business of prayer. And if we happen to have an engagement with someone, well, that's just a bonus.
And what's the law on abortion in Australia? It's kind of been very much completely liberalised right to the end of the spectrum. So there
are basically no limits. Yeah, women just need 2 doctors to sign off on a certificate, and one of those is the abortionist. So it's really it's pretty dismal as far as the availability and the mindset of women. It's not, people don't really think twice about it. And it's very sad. It's very sad. And to do something about it, to change the culture is huge, because there are so many problems that will lead women to think this way, and men to think this way. You know, there's so much pornography, and people are surrounded by this idea that fornication, you know, this is just recreation. Sex is recreation. So to really make a difference, we need a huge change in attitude towards babies and motherhood and family, and what, you know, changing people's idea about stability and finances and all sorts of things. Not saying it can't be done, but it's a massive problem. It's not something that humans can actually solve, I don't think. I really think there has to be some huge religious and spiritual conversion to change people's attitude to life.
Absolutely. Well, that's the world that we're in. It needs divine intervention. So, and so you're in one of the hardest places in the world to witness to life. I mean, everywhere's difficult, but in addition to that, 10 years ago in Melbourne, there was a bodyguard who died. Some crazy person killed him, and that must have affected the pro-life work considerably. Pro-abortionists would have probably capitalized on that and blamed the pro-lifers, when probably in reality it was a crazy person who had nothing to do with any pro-life groups. So tell us a little bit about that story. That's quite extremely rare to happen. I think there's been 4 cases in America, but pro-lifers are always brandished as violent and misogynistic because of these cases. So has that affected, or is that 10 years ago and that's a kind of a different era, or people very much remember it? Yeah,
it really did. And it really feeds into that narrative, the right-wing extremists and the Christian extremists, that all has helped to stoke those discriminatory fires against us. That case was brought up in court when I went through court, and I've heard it mentioned by activists in the US as well. So it did the abortion lobby so much good, and it did us so much harm. It's not long ago that I published an interview that I did with one of the helpers who knew the man who was responsible. And he had just turned up sometimes to pray with the helpers, but he wasn't actually one of them. He thought they weren't pro-life enough. That's how crazy he was. And they didn't invite him to meetings and so on. They just felt something was a bit off about him. And they were actually praying before he got there that day. And they knew the bodyguard. They used to chat to him. They used to ask him, you know, why do you do this job? Why don't you, get another job, and he'd say, oh, I've got a family and so on. He was a nice man. I'm sure he had no idea what went on inside the building. He was only there to escort the girls in, and in an indication of what the abortion business is like, his job ended after they'd gone in. He didn't have to stick around for when they came out, because the abortionists don't really care about the women afterwards. It was just to get them past the helpers, who really did a lot of good with turnarounds when they were allowed to be right outside. They saved hundreds of babies. They are really legendary. Yeah,
amazing.
They're amazing people.
So how do you balance, obviously your vacation as a mother and mother of 13 children, and then also doing pro-life work? And it's, it's a dynamic balance of, God's first in your life, and then, family is second. But then you have this passion and fire for the pro-life movement as well. And how do you balance that in terms of commitments, obligations, priorities? And you don't want the pro-life work undermining family life. This is a challenge I've always had of trying to have balance in your life, being grace-filled and putting your family first. So how do you manage that situation?
Yeah, it's something that I think about a lot, and we do really have to think about a lot. My vocation as a mother comes first, definitely. And I will say no to things because I have to be a good mum, and I want to be a good mum, and I want to be with my children. I like being with my children. But when they were little, I didn't do pro-life work. And I'm glad it's worked out the way that it has, because I just did, my family was my sole focus when the children were little. And so I don't have any regrets about that at all. I'm glad I was able to do that and really put everything into it. And honestly, with homeschooling, I wouldn't have been able to do anything else anyway, or not successfully. Mm-hmm. So by the time I really felt this calling, my children were older. My youngest, I think, was 2 then. So I was still rather limited. And that's why I thought that all I would be doing was writing. So it was a bit of a surprise to feel this, to get involved with actually breaking the law and challenging the safe access zones, they're called here. But I also only took that on because I felt that I could manage that. I knew that it was going to take a few years, and it wasn't full time. It would be court appearances and then breaks, and court appearances and breaks. And that's, everybody pretty much, I think, knows the way court cases run. They drag on, and there's intense activity and big breaks in between. So it was because of my family that I decided to do that, and thought that I would be able to cope with that. And it was still a bit hard, but I think it was, on balance, that was really good for my children as well, to see what commitment looks like, and to see what sacrifice looks like, and that it's worth making a sacrifice when something is a really important issue. So now most of what I do is writing. I have only been doing 1 40 Days for Life campaign a year. I'd like to do the second one, but I'm not sure that would be good for us. So that's a decision that is just going to have to wait for me.
Excellent. And I was having a large family. People like give you looks in the supermarket and stuff. And how do you deal with that situation? A bit of humor and kind of everyone's looking at you, kind of counting. It's like you got to kind of take it back to them with a bit of with a bit of smart. You kind of grow oblivious to that kind of reaction from the public as well. So
we really didn't get many negative. We always got more positive than negative.
Right. Yeah.
Thankfully, yeah. I mean, there's a little bit, and people say the most, they say really intimate, rude things sometimes, but they just don't really think. A lot of people don't think; they just comment. But I remember one really stuck in my mind. A fellow at a shop, I went into a grocery store, and which he owned, and he said he never had any children, but he said if he was going to do it, he would do it like that. Just go all out and have a really big family. So,
that's great. Yeah, sometimes people say really positive words, actually, so it's really kind.
Yeah.
So what point did you decide that you were going to challenge the buffers that, ironically they're called safe access zones? They're not safe for the baby, obviously, because what's happening to the child in abortion. But at what point did you feel like, right, I feel so strongly on this? And did you think it was a case that you were going to win, or was it a matter of principle for you of like somebody's got to stand in the breach kind of and there's so many spiritual blessings that can come from taking a stand in life in general, in principle. So at what point did you kind of go, right, this is something I feel cool to? Was that because you'd seen it in Tasmania, you'd seen an example of it? And how did things progress from there?
So in Tasmania, when they went through in Tasmania, I actually wanted to challenge the law, but was advised not to because people were talking about perhaps just launching a legal challenge without anyone being arrested. And I'm glad that it wasn't me then. I wasn't really ready, and I didn't really have experience in a lot of things that I did a few years later when it was actually my turn. So I was invited by Family Life International, actually, whom I wasn't working with then, because they'd already been in talks with lawyers, and there had been quite a lot of discussion before I was invited to be the person. So the first couple of people who they approached did not want to do it. So I think I was about third on the list. And because it had already been in my mind from Tasmania, I'd been through what I was talking about before, about thinking about the effect on the family and so on, I accepted the challenge straight away. So it was quite different from what often happens to people, where it's completely spontaneous and they had no idea what was going to happen and they didn't realize there were going to be police or whatever. We've heard of those kinds of situations, and that's what happened at Ealing, I believe. Mm-hmm. But I had the legal backing. I had pro bono lawyers, and we'd even been to the police to discuss it with them, to tell them that they didn't know who it was going to be, but they knew that we were going to be challenging the law. And the police were there that day, and they had video cameras. And despite that, they still sent about 10 anti-riot police around when I was arrested. It was unbelievable, but even though it was just me, and my friend was there as well. He was praying, and I approached the women.
That's an ultimate compliment, really.
Yeah, I guess so. It was just, that was in the background, so I wasn't really taking much notice, but it was a bit strange. But that's the context. I can't say that I really knew what I was getting myself into, but I did have a good idea of how it was going to be approached legally. We knew that it was risky because we don't have a constitutional protection in Australia for freedom of speech. The nearest that we have is something called an implied freedom of political communication. And that really only relates to political campaigns around the time of an election. So we knew that it was a bit of a stretch, but we did it anyway. Yeah, we did it. And there was a huge fundraising effort, and the Australian Christian Lobby, that's a big Protestant group who do a lot of liaising with the government, and they really know how to run a campaign. They raised a lot of money, and people gave so much support, and people were very generous, and people were praying for me. Thousands of people were praying for me. So I felt very supported, and I felt honored to do this on behalf of so many other people who, for whatever reason, couldn't be the one to actually be arrested and go through the process. So I felt that I was doing something for them, and I was very grateful for all the support that I had.
And so how many times did you get arrested? Was it just the once, or was it multiple times? And did you think you'd win the case at the beginning, and then it became more complicated, and then it started in the Melbourne court, and then you went to Canberra, the High Court, I presume?
Yeah, that's right. So I was only arrested once, and then I was given very strict bail conditions. So strict that we had to go back to court and get some exemptions from them.
Okay.
I wasn't allowed within 150 meters of any abortion provider anywhere in the state. So even if I couldn't go near a chemist or a hospital or anything like that, it was just ridiculous. So we went and had that altered. The magistrate who set down the bail conditions obviously had no idea how easy it was to procure an abortion in Victoria and how many establishments there were for the procuring of abortions. So we applied. I was found guilty in the magistrate's court, which was not at all surprising, because we always wanted to go and do a constitutional challenge in the High Court. And there was no question that I had actually broken the law. So there was nothing to prove as far as my innocence in the magistrate's court. We applied for an appeal in the Supreme Court, but we also applied to go straight to the High Court for the constitutional challenge. And that was surprisingly accepted before we got to the Supreme Court appeal. So I wasn't very confident that we would win, but I didn't think it would be unanimous. I thought there would be someone of the High Court judges who would agree with our position that we had a right to not only point out what's happening inside the building and not only object to that for our own sake, but also the right to help these women. And this is the real tragedy. Obviously, what happens to me as a person or as a pro-life, it really isn't that important. But the fact that we could actually help these women and that they would change their mind, it happened so frequently. It happened on an average once a month. There was a turnaround at that particular place. And I wasn't part of most of those. I didn't do a lot of witnessing. It was just once a week for a couple of hours. So the veterans who ran it for 20 years, the helpers of God's precious infants, most of the time, were getting great results. I did help save a baby at a different place where I used to witness, and it was the last baby that we know of that was saved before the bubble zones went in. And he was born on my mum's birthday. So that's pretty special. Yeah. But, to think this is what we tried to put forward when the legislation was going through and to the court, that women, there must be something wrong with abortion if women listen to us and change their minds. They must at least be given the option. We're not trying to force anything on anyone. We're just giving them an alternative. And that's probably the most heartbreaking thing, that side of it was ignored. Women obviously are looking for an alternative, and it's obviously they're not getting the information. And these laws obviously aren't changing that. They're only making it worse.
You kind of think that being in a court situation, that sort of common sense, logic, critical analysis of abortion would apply. But I've found it mind-blowing that, we've had this Ealing court case and it's led to freedom of thought, as in thought crimes coming in. I never thought the buffer zones would be on the level of prayer and level of thought. I thought it would just be about the physical location and not being there, but to actually be on the level of physical thought. But then we've witnessed the spiritual consequences of that. We've had an international story with Isabel von Spruce being arrested. That went viral internationally, one of the biggest stories ever. And the consciences of hundreds of millions of people worldwide being affected. So, on the one case, you've got sort of losing this court case, and the issue is never about us, it's about the babies and the public witness. And so we've seen this whole other side comparing it to 1984, George Orwell. And then suddenly, everyone's talking about the issue. So things are only going to get more crazy. We've got 3 leaders now in the UK, and they've all got court cases as well, let alone Scotland that's just introduced it. So, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. There's so many more opportunities in life. And I think, that's for us to witness in a really powerful way. So what we're doing, there's a pastoral, the prophetic angle of pro-life work. And when things get really crazy, there's a chance to witness on another level. But I've been dumbfounded in the court system of just, having this kind of nonish response. You'd think that one of the judges go, well, hang on a minute, this is a thought crime, this is bonkers. Like, you'd think that somebody would take a stand, but I don't think the legal world works like that. And it's all very sort of, um, case driven and cerebral, not a lot of heart in the legal system. So we found no friends at all in the legal system. Not only that we're sort of ostracized, we are in the political wilderness, we're in a spiritual desert here in the same way. But all the same, when these babies are saved, and it's happened so many times in the UK, that's a chance for all of heaven to rejoice. So, you can be reprimanded, abused, insulted, arrested, you name it. And if they're doing this to the babies, then it's going to happen to us as well. So did you get any kickback from Christians who thought that you were doing the wrong thing, or pro-life groups calling you, because you're being contentious and controversial? And that's also another angle that's quite surprising, of you think that people would be with you, like on the same side, but then when people on your own side come along and then attack you, that's also another spiritual angle. You don't necessarily see that one coming, of seeing pro-lifers criticize you or say you're doing the wrong thing. Did you witness that as well?
A little
Yeah.
at the beginning. Friendly fire. I always say friendly fire is the hardest thing to deal with. But it's okay. You just go, well, that's more sacrifice, that's more suffering, that's okay. It's good for my pride to not have everybody on my side. And maybe they've got a point in something they're saying, it largely didn't happen though. Only a little bit.
So the judgment and the ruling. So being in a court case, you kind of get the honor of having your name on the ruling as well. So it's Clubb versus Edwards from the High Court in Canberra. Tell us about that judgment and ruling, and what that means and what implications it has.
Well, because of that, the case actually became quite big. So the Graham Preston, who I mentioned before, who broke the law in Tasmania, his case was joined with mine, the Victorian one, and then the attorneys general from the other states also joined in, because they were thinking about, or they either had buffer zone legislation on the table, or they would be bringing it in or attempting it in the future. So because of my case, the other states basically just went ahead with their buffer zones, and there was no real opposition. So that was a really unfortunate consequence. We knew that would be a consequence, and it probably would have happened even without the court case. They just had more legal ground to stand on. I think just there was a point you made before about having no friends in the court. The most difficult thing for me sitting in the courtroom in the High Court was listening to them speaking so dispassionately about abortion and about women's rights and all of this kind of thing. There was nothing about babies, and the case wasn't about abortion as such. It was about balancing rights of people to protest versus rights of women to get medical treatments and so on. So, I mean, from a legal point of view, that's accurate, but to just listen to people acting like it's nothing, it's like acting like it's a haircut or something. It was diabolical disorientation, or a kind of like a mental illness. These are the smartest people in the country. They can't see that we're actually talking about killing babies, and that it's not even an issue whether or not that should be legal, just about whether or not people should point out that it's not a very nice thing to do. So it's just, it was quite crazy. It was crazy and heartbreaking and frustrating to see that. So when the decision was handed down, that was a very quick process. That happened in the court in Brisbane, and I just flew up there and I stayed with Graham's lovely family, and we all went together, and it was over in a few minutes. They just handed it down just like that. So because of that, I still have a criminal record and a costs order against me. which has never been applied. I've never seen the bill. It's probably a very big bill, but they know that I can't afford to pay it. So I think it's just being held as a deterrent. I suppose it's also going to deter other people from trying to challenge the law. I hope someone does in the future, perhaps on other grounds, perhaps on religious freedom footing instead, because my colleague who was there the same day as me was not arrested and he was simply praying. So we didn't have the thought crime aspect. He was allowed to be let go. Even though I think when the law was passed in the debates in Parliament, the politicians who were in favour of it were hoping that prayer would be outlawed as well. But it certainly wasn't applied the day that I was arrested.
And so the ruling said that basically your kind of arrest was legitimate and just concurred with the police, basically. Yeah. So that was the conclusion.
Yeah. And then I went back to the Supreme Court and I was just found guilty again there and given a fine. So, it was all a little bit of an anticlimax by the time I got to that point.
And what spiritually did you learn from kind of the whole court case and the whole journey of that?
I learned a lot. I did learn a lot. I learned that we have to be very, very humble. That's the biggest thing that I learned in our pro-life work. Nothing, we can't take anything for ourselves. We have to just do God's will and just accept whatever happens and don't try and take an ounce of credit for ourselves, that's a big temptation when you've got people telling you how wonderful you are and great and brave and all that kind of thing constantly. That's not very good for you. It's not good for your pride to hear that. So you have to be very strong and go, well, yeah, today people might think that, tomorrow, whatever. And also that just it underscored for me my obligations to my family have to come first. So that was just something I was very aware of all the time. And there were things that I said no to even during the case because of the family interviews and so on. And someone wanted to do a reality TV show and have me on it with people from all different spiritualities getting together, and I don't know, it sounded like Big Brother, but in a religious way. It was pretty weird. I mean, that wasn't much of a struggle to give that one up. I didn't really want to be involved in that, but it really got me onto the path of thinking very much about virtue and pro-life work. It made me make sure that everything that I do must be virtuous. Not only humble, but I must never be misrepresent anything. Be very truthful about everything. I know some people like to hide the fact that they're pro-life. Some of them distance themselves from pro-lifers and kind of think that it's a good strategy to act like you're not pro-life, but really be pro-life. I don't know if you've come across that. Yeah. It happens a bit here, but I don't think that's right. I think we have to really own who we are and be very virtuous in all of our dealings, in how we deal with people who are new, in people who don't know how things work, in people who are maybe a bit funny, people who aren't like us, or people who don't have certain skills. We have to be very diplomatic and very grateful for whatever people bring, and not think we have all the answers, and be listening to other people who come along. Definitely listen to people who've been in the movement for longer than us, because they've always got a lot of insight.
Yeah.
So these were really important lessons for me that set me up for the work that I've done since then. So I'm very, very grateful for being kind of thrown in the deep end and having to learn these things.
Is there a time in the court case where you felt isolated, or kind of everyone's attacking you and you're sort of in the middle, or you felt supported by the pro-lifers and you actually had the legal support of Australian Christian lobby, etc. So
yeah, most of the time I did feel really supported.
yeah,
and I was just so grateful for 3.5 years it took. I was very grateful every moment for the support that I had. There was one moment where I did feel attacked, but again, I actually was, I was actually very grateful for this because I hadn't really suffered by feeling isolated or on my own or anything. And at this one moment when I was receiving the sentencing in the magistrate's court, the magistrate really did attack me, and she was very personal and asking me, basically accusing me of not being a good mother, homeschooling, having too many children, how many have I got at home, blah, blah. She was really like going like this. And at that time, at the time of the arrest, I should say, my children were actually in school for a short time. It wasn't a very good decision that I made. I put them in for a while. I think if you've been homeschooling for a while, I think you might identify with that. You have phases sometimes.
Yeah.
So I was able to tell her that, but she was very, very personal, and she was very rude. She told me if she ever saw me in court again, in her court, for any charge whatsoever for the rest of my life, she would have me thrown in jail. Didn't matter what it was.
Wow.
Yeah. So she can't do that. She's not legally allowed to do that, but it was not very nice. But yeah, I was at that moment I thought, well, I actually feel a bit persecuted. I was very grateful for that because I'd had all this support. It was good to actually feel a little bit of suffering. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so now you're doing a 40 days campaign outside the buffer zone. And what does that entail? What's it like doing a vigil on the edge? You're still witnessing to the public, and give us some of the dynamics of what that involves, what that entails, and how the witness to the public is still really effective and the prayers are still working. Our guardian angel can speak to anybody who's going for an abortion as well. And we had 6 turnarounds in Ealing from a vigil outside the buffer zone. So we're reaching like 100 people every day, talking to them in the street. So it's a busy street. They have to walk up the street to go to the abortion centre. There's a vigil at both ends of the street, so there's still a lot going on. So what's it like doing the vigil outside the buffer zone?
So where we've done it before, we're actually moving to a new location for the next campaign, but where we've been doing it at the place where I was arrested, providentially, the 150-meter mark is right outside the train station and across the road from a tram station or a tram stop. So there's a huge amount of traffic and it's a very busy road. So there's a lot of exposure. And so we know people see us because they wind down the windows and give us rude gestures and beat the horn and yell things out. So they're definitely
you you're number one. They're putting their finger out.
Like
yeah, you're number one.
Say that. You could say that. Yeah. So that amount of exposure is it doesn't make up for saving babies, but that's huge. It's a huge thing. I do want to try. You've told me about Ealing, and I do want to try to engage with the public during the next campaign, which might be a little bit easier because it's not the inner city. It's a suburban area near a shopping centre. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see if we can do that in the location, presuming that we get council permission and so on. I think it's challenging. It's definitely challenging, but we've always known that it's not about numbers of babies being saved. We've always known that, and we've always known it's about saving souls. And so this really just makes that more obvious. We go there knowing that we are probably not going to help any women or even talk to them. It's not possible to stand where the women access the clinic the way it's set up in the city, or this one. We just can't do that. So we go in knowing that, and knowing that we're probably not going to see any fruit, not a single fruit from our prayers. So that's challenging, but it's good for us. We know these prayers are going somewhere. Maybe they went to Ealing, we don't know. Or maybe there's an abortion worker who's just got a little seed of doubt starting to grow in their soul. So we don't know, and we don't know. We see people sometimes pull up and leave. We don't know what that means, but God knows. And we just yeah, it's good for us. It's good in this time of this general kind of persecution of Christians for us to really think about what we're on about. And if we really believe that in the power of prayer, then this is what we're going to do. Go without expecting to see any results.
That's right. And, to be stripped of everything, the right to freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of thought, to be stripped of all those things and to persevere is actually a sign of courage, sign of humility. And, our demeanor and the way that we have virtue in our own lives, we can still reach people, we can still talk to them. There are things that we can do and things that we can't do. And, God can work in certain ways and we don't know the fruit of our prayers. So it's a real test of perseverance, fortitude, humility to still go out there, do it anyway, in spite of all these things being taken away from us. There's still tangible good that we can do. And I think, we've had more than 5 years of the buffer zone in Ealing in London. And I think just get out there, do it anyway, choose to be there joyfully. One guy was handing out leaflets, he handed it out to 100 people in 1 hour. Some people cursed him, some people praised him, but he did God's work and he reached so many people. It's just absolutely incredible. So that's the attitude that we need and the demeanor. And then at some point, there's a massive breakthrough, and it's on God's timing and not ours. And the whole point of 40 days is to turn to God. He's the author of life and love. And we turn to Him, access the power of God. He's the one, his heart burns for those children who are lost to abortion, just like ours does as well. And when we unite our will with His in everything that we think, do, and say, then that's when miracles can happen. But things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. And of course, you were in Melbourne was one of the most crazy places. And this is relevant to your court case of the COVID lockdowns. Just Melbourne was one of the worst places in the world. So, having lost your freedom of assembly, the right to be outside an abortion centre, there was a whole period of maybe 2 years where just civil liberties were just hit for six and just completely battered. So what was that like in Melbourne during that time, and how did you kind of survive spiritually?
Well, I was actually looking at a bit of footage of what's happening in Southport at the moment in the UK,
Yeah.
and it really reminded me, seeing the riot police there and the way they're treating the protesters, reminded me of Melbourne. We really did have violent clashes similar to those. There was an oppressive feeling over the entire state that is pretty hard to describe, but it was not a nice feeling. And then to hear what was happening, families falling apart over the mandates, and if someone did want the gene serum, if someone did not want the gene serum, neighbors snitching on each other.
Wow.
Sometimes if we'd walk down the street not wearing a mask, people would cross the road. Children being yelled at for going to the park. Some parks were closed, beaches were closed. We had helicopters flying very low overhead, and a lot of surveillance cameras were added to the city during the time of the lockdowns. We still, the people that I knew were people who were willing to take a few risks, if you know what I mean. But we kept our sanity by communicating with each other and getting together. And spiritually, most of the time, it was okay. We had live stream church services, which of course is not the same thing, but it was a way of keeping our parish community together. And, we could see our priest on the screen, and we knew he was offering mass for us and for everyone. So we just united ourselves at home in the same way that we would if we were in the church, and just put as much into it and got as much out of it as we could. It was difficult, but because I homeschooled, it was easier for our family than for a lot of other people, because a lot of children are not used to being at home, and they're trying to do this online learning, and the parents are working from home, and it was very stressful for many families for that reason. So I was, again, very grateful that I was homeschooling. So it had less impact on my family than on a lot of other people.
Yeah. Well, it was a crazy time, and it's really related to civil liberties of just how untested. But being a homeschooler really helps because you're not going out to school, and so you've been less affected in that regard. The same for us in that also.
Yeah.
And pro-life movement in Australia. How do you see? What do pro-lifers need to do to be more effective in terms of reaching people? We've got this really secular culture. People don't believe in God. They don't have values. Where do you start? How do you communicate a message of there are babies who are dying from abortion, and actually there's something we can do about it, and it doesn't have to be that way, and we can change people's minds, we can touch hearts and minds, and we can lead to conversions. We can have people go to post-abortion healing. We can see people not go ahead with abortions. We change your heart, change of opinion. How do you do community outreach in a way that really reaches people and gets them to think?
Yeah, well, in some respects, it's really what you do anyway, which is the one-to-one relationships, the people that are around you, the people that you know, your family, your friends, your neighbors. So that's where it's always going to start. And I think also mothers especially, but fathers to some extent, we all have a role to play without doing active pro-life work in just loving your family and being a witness of enjoying being with your children, showing people that, I actually like having children. They're not ruining my life. Yes, it might be hard sometimes, being honest, but also just kind of being an example of a parent and enjoying being a parent. I think that's so valuable. And I think that aspect is actually undervalued. So, that's something that everyone can do. The conversations are really important. So it's good if people aren't doing active pro-life work, even just having a few facts up your sleeve about people don't know. A lot of people don't know that abortion's legal in Victoria to full term. They just don't know. And most people are horrified by that when they do find out. But I don't like to concentrate too much on that side. There's a movement here at the moment, people trying to bring in a Babies Born Alive Act and resuscitating failed abortions, that kind of thing, or babies resuscitating a baby after a failed abortion. And obviously that's not a bad thing in itself, but I don't think that's really getting to the fundamental problem. And also we can't let people be thinking that it's only the big babies that need to be saved, and that when they're teeny tiny and still look like a blob, well, that it doesn't really matter that much. We can't let people think that way. The abortion pill is making that worse. That woman can just take a pill and kill the baby, and basically no one has to know, and it's all done at home. It's just that's just such a lose thing. It's just it's really diabolical. So I think it's better to be really concentrating on basics. Gets back to what I was talking about before. Things like modesty, chastity, marriage, don't have sex until you're married. These really, really basic things that a lot of people have never really thought about. Let's have some stability before we start making babies. Let's make commitments. And if a baby comes along, well, we should all know what support networks are there for women. We could have so many more pregnancy centres here in Australia and so many more post-abortion counsellors. We're really pretty low on both of those. But they're things that if people have the addresses and the contact details of counsellors and pregnancy centres in their home, if a granddaughter comes along pregnant, or the next door neighbour is pregnant or something like that, you've got that information to share with them. And it doesn't have to be, you're not forcing anyone to do anything. It's just giving an alternative to the people around you if that situation arises. I think I think contraception, speaking out about contraception is really, really important, because unfortunately some pro-lifers think that if more people contracept, then the abortion rate is going to go down. And that's the opposite is true. Apart from the spiritual side of it, just the actual statistics don't show that. But it obviously the contraceptive mentality feeds into the abortion mentality. We know that. So these are the fundamentals that pro-lifers really need to be working on. It's probably not unique to Australia either. I think that's a worldwide problem. We really need to just change the narrative by talking about these fundamental problems.
Yeah, well, it's just such an exciting time for states of life. So, I mean, we've got this crazy paradox here in the UK. We're getting a national ban, which is like the ultimate compliment. It's like, you know, you're relevant, you're a threat, you're having an impact. Therefore, we're going to ban you on the whole country on the level of thought. So, we've got this Orwellian sort of culture, the whole country, and then this is leading to huge openings of apologetics, engagement, evangelization. So on the one hand, it looks crazy, like, hang on, we're facing tyranny here. On the other, it just opens a Pandora's box of can of worms of, you know, hang on, we just sparked an international conversation, and then all the projects from the USA are absolutely phenomenal. We've had Unplanned, the film that's gone viral all over the US. Lots of interest internationally for that film. It showed the graphic reality of abortion. It hit all that. It was a hard-hitting film. It hit all the tough points of abortion, showed them, exposed them, and was an evangelization tool to get people to think critically. And, you know, we need to engage people positively with, you know, actually we've got a point and we need to think, you know, how can we engage culture in a way that touches hearts and minds, not just Christians, just the whole of society. And going out in public and standing and praying is the most effective thing, especially near an abortion center, the most effective thing that you can do personally, because we have to reach people personally, not just abstractly on the internet, and reach where they are. And some people will give us a mouthful and tell us that we're beep, 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 bigots. And that's great because that's where they are and you're meeting them where they're at. And other people will say, this is amazing. So on the one hand, we've got, you know, our pro-lifers turning into criminals at home. But then abroad, there's just opportunities for celebrity of just getting out there and making a case and having huge inroads. So been on the most amazing mission trips this year, just been completely mind-blowing of what can happen. And then we've got the apologetics arm, what to say when. We've got 2 books on that. We've got all the books now. We've got the magazines. So all the US projects that have been a huge success, we can now implement any of those in any country. Anybody wants to go to that level. So if they want to do magazines, they want to do merchandise, they want to do books, they want to get the film out there, the movie out there in a bigger way. All those projects are just sitting there waiting. So, you know, we could say, well, we can't witness outside the abortion center, but hey, we can do lots of other things. And there's hundreds of ways in which we can do community outreach in a really, really effective way. In a court case like you've been in is, you know, you get a ton of media coverage. It's a spiritual battle, engages hearts and minds. It's a fundraising opportunity. We're going to have loads of these in the UK, and every chance is a chance to witness for the unborn. And ultimately, the issue isn't about us. You know, in the court case you've been, it's not about you personally. It's about the witness and the right to witness. And if that's taken away, then it's an act of tyranny. And it's absolutely crazy, but there will be a tipping point. And having seen Roe versus Wade happen in the USA, you know, it's filled us with a ton of hope, and it's filled our opponents here in Britain with trepidation of heaven forbid anything happen like that in this country. But, you know, at some point, you know, on the grassroots, they're winning in America. Many more states are turning pro-life. They're having these referendum. They seem to be losing some of them, but, you know, it's now a battle on the local state, and legally it's gone completely mad of so many people needing legal help, etc. So that's only going to be more of the case in the UK, more people needing legal help and challenges. And we just keep doing what we're doing. The biggest thing is, are we being faithful to God? Are we doing what he's calling us to? That's the biggest thing. And the whole point of 40 days is prayer. It's God. And, you know, it's for decades in the pro-life movement in the UK, it was, oh, don't mention God, don't mention religion. You know, this is we don't want to upset our religious opponents. And we're the antithetical opposite to that of not worrying what people think about us. And when we don't worry what people think about us, then, I mean, being involved in a legal case, it's like, you know, am I bothered? Like, it's like, not worried at all about what other people think of us. That's when God can use us really powerfully to touch more people than we've ever touched before. So I'm not afraid of any of the challenges that we have. And if we're not being persecuted in this kind of environment where we've got the most extreme abortion laws, then we should have probably examine our conscience, like what's going wrong, of like, we're not being challenged. We're not sort of trying. We've got to change the status quo as activists. And prayer is the most powerful thing because, with God, all things are possible. And we've seen that in America. We've seen the power of prayer. We've seen workers change their minds. We've seen abortion clinics close. All the spiritual blessings that have happened in the USA, we've seen happen in the UK because we've followed the same methodology and the same principles, prayer, standing outside abortion clinics, and we've added tremendous value to the pro-life movement in the UK from following prayer, getting out there, being in public, engaging with the public. This is what they hate, and we just keep doing what they don't like and keep seeing results, and that's the way that we make progress. And things will get worse, and that suddenly there'll be a tipping point, and then things will get a lot better. But we would love to galvanize a national debate on abortion and to get the pro-life movement working. There are so many great activists in the UK. None of them work together. They've all got their little fiefdoms and kingdoms. But if everyone came together and we had a united movement like in Poland, then we would see incredible results. And pro-life movement, we need to be like a battleship. At the moment, it's like a cruise ship, and some people are working and some people are having a rest. But if we're like a battleship, it's all hands on deck and everyone's working, and we've got the same mission, the same purpose, and we're in the same spiritual battle, and we're all working towards the same cause. And then our movement looks like a battleship and not a cruise ship. And that's when we're going to see change. And we're going to lose legally. Like the gay rights movements, they lost legally like 30 times, and then they won, and then they didn't stop winning after that. So we need to lose legally, and we need to have the courage to lose legally. And there's dignity and honor in losing legally because you stood for the principle. And actually, it's a spiritual battle. It's not about the court case. Okay, the court case is important, but God's in charge, and this is God's battle. It's not our battle. And we don't. If you don't actually get in the, if you don't get onto the football field to play, then you can't win or lose. So many people go, I don't want to get out there. Like, I don't want to lose. And so if we actually get on the pitch, and then we've got the chance, and obviously we might lose and we might get challenged and persecuted and all the rest of it, but it's not a red persecution, it's a white persecution, and we can be challenged, humiliated. The devil can use all sorts of tricks against us, but ultimately, if we don't take a stand, if we don't go forwards, then God can't really work closely in ending abortion. So I'm full of hope with loads of great things going on the international level, and there's just opportunity after opportunity. So thank you, Kathy, for your witness. Amazing to stand up in court, to be challenged, to be dragged through the legal system, state to state, from Canberra to Brisbane to Melbourne. What message do you have for our 40 Days for Life leaders and volunteers?
I would say 3 things are really important when you're running a campaign. I would say get a core group around you that you can really rely on, and don't worry too much if you can't get the numbers for a campaign. Don't worry, just start with what you have. As long as you've got those really reliable, committed people around you, don't worry if you can't fill all the hours. Just do your best. Don't compare yourself with other campaigns. You can learn from them, but don't compare yourself and think that what you're doing is a waste of time because you're not doing what's happening in America or some other place that seems to be very vibrant. You just go out there and do your best with the group that you have. And also be true to your culture. Again, we're so used to seeing what happens in America, and it has inspired us, and it has got a lot of things started in our countries. I think their example has got us started. But we are not America. We're Britain, and we're Australia, and or whatever other nations are represented in the listeners. Be true to your culture and take the best of it. Apply the 40 Days for Life model. Take all the good lessons, but apply it to your culture and see what you can do that fits in with your society. And I think that you'll be happy then, instead of trying to replicate exactly the culture of America. Replicate the model, but apply it to your culture. And I think that we'll just see 40 Days for Life International continuing to grow. I'm really excited. Every time I talk to Robert, I feel really inspired and really elevated that we are doing such a good thing. I mean, what we're doing, we are so privileged that this is what, out of all the different causes in the world, this is what God has called us to do. And it's such an honor. And I really want to thank all of you for whatever you're doing, even if you think it's something very small. It's not. It's all very helpful and significant to God, and it all helps to inspire us to keep going and keep looking for different horizons. And thank you, Robert, especially. I know you've been at this a long time, and you're always so encouraging, and I just really want to thank you for that.
That's wonderful, Kathy. And yeah, acculturation, making it relevant to your own country is always really important. And that's very much, what we have to do. So, and each local leader knows their country really, really well. Kathy, it's been a privilege speaking with you today. Do go to 40daysforlifeinternational.com. We've got loads of other podcasts there, along with lots of other international articles. It's growing all the time. 40diasporlavida.com is our Spanish Ibero-American website as well. It's huge. 40 Days for Life in every country in Latin America too. So we're just growing on the international side. So come be part of our movement. And thank you, Kathy, for your courage, for your witness. Keep up the great work in Melbourne. We value and appreciate you so much. And for all our Australian viewers and listeners, may God bless you. Thank you for listening and watching. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you and God bless you.
No te pierdas los podcasts de 40 días por la vida internacional con entrevistas, reportajes y testimonios de todo el mundo.
Don't miss our podcasts with interviews, news, and reports from around the world.